it was difficult sometimes to come up with what to say, despite the fact that, again, you're talking about yourself. The one subject, right, you should know the most about, right? It can sometimes be awkward to talk about yourself. Like, there's a lot of people who, when the spotlight's on them, they get very sheepish, right? Like, they don't want the attention. They don't necessarily mind talking about themselves, but like if everybody's looking at them and everything stops and all eyes are that way, like all of a sudden it's awkward and uncomfortable, right? Based on what, this is for everybody now, based on what the person chose to include in the response, what do you think that says about each one of them? We're not trying to make huge character assessments or assassinations here, but what do you think it says about a person based on what they choose to say up here to that question?
Well, definitely the things that there were obviously not as some of their main interests. So a lot of what Rick said, her ministry, but definitely something you find out is probably a big thing that she does in her life, as well as her mentioning and going to college for business.
Yep. So you're going to put your interests out there, my favorite football team, I like to do crafts, right? Long walks on the beach, this kind of thing, right? Is it interesting, do you find, that nobody got up here and said any of their failures or shortcomings, right? That tell me about yourself also could include some of the things that are less desirable about you, but the prompt was compel us to want to get to know you better. Our human inclination, right, is to say, well, let me tell you all the good stuff, right? That maybe the time could have been filled. I mean, it's like, I don't have any. Right? And you say, well, we also have those. You say, all right, Joshua, that was cheesy and tactless, right? But think about this for a second, right? You in your lives, and I'm saying you, the collective you, me too, us as adults, you all as teens, we in our lives, we're going to constantly be asked some version of that question all throughout our lives. Tell me about yourself. Some version of that question will be asked to you all throughout your life, right? When you get a job interview, you're going to be asked, why should we hire you, right? What makes you a more desirable candidate for employment than the next person? When you're on a date, James talked about this last month. When you're on a date, you need to tell the person something about yourself, right? If you're sitting across from them in an Applebee's, right? Where do teenagers go for dates anymore, right? Right? We go to Chick-fil-A. Who said Chick-fil-A? Right? When you're sitting across from somebody that you have a romantic interest in, like you're vibing, you're like, whoa, what's up between y'all? We're just talking, right? When you're on a date, you want to try and tell that person something about yourself, yeah? So you're answering an iteration of the question, right? If you start a business in your life and you venture out as an entrepreneur later in the future, right? You want to try and articulate the role that you have in the organization, right? Maybe even on your business you have an About Me page. You ever look up somebody's business or a website for a product you want to buy or something you want to read about, and there's an About Me, the person who started it or the product they're selling, and you read about them, and that endears you to buy their product or to use their services maybe. Even for you, right? About Me. For many of you, you're going to have to fill out a college application or scholarship essay. Who's done college applications or scholarship essays anytime recently, right? Some of y'all, right? The older ones, yeah, for sure. You're going to have to fill out on college applications and on scholarship essays, right? And other applications you fill out in your lifetime. You're going to have to answer some version of this question, tell me about yourself, right? The committee is going to say, who are you and why are you a good fit for our school, for our institution, right? For our scholarship. Is it advancing? And this is because how you see yourself and how you promote yourself speaks volumes about who you are as a person. How you see yourself and how you promote yourself speaks volumes about who you are as a person. That's why it's vital to understand the influence in our lives that impact who we are and how we see ourselves, right? Who we are and how we see ourselves is not exclusively in a vacuum. We didn't come to those conclusions about ourselves and who we are void of outside influence, right? So it's vital to understand the influences in our lives that impact who we are and how we see ourselves. Yeah, I don't think this is working, dude. I'll just say next slide. We'll keep it moving. So for our new series this month, it's called What's Your Story? Okay? What's your story? So this month I want to dive into your life so that you can discover how God is writing your story and how we can join him in writing it, right? Understanding your story will improve your sight. This is some of the goal I want to achieve with this month. It's going to help improve your sight. What do I mean by that? Your hindsight, your foresight, and your now sight, right? I'm calling it now sight. It's just sight, right? Your hindsight, looking back in your past, your history, your background. I want to see that more clearly. How many says hindsight has what vision? Who knows this? You know the saying? Nobody knows the saying? Hindsight has 20/20 vision. When you look back on your past, you often have a much clearer view of it than you do when you're in it, right? Hindsight. I want to help you with your hindsight. I want to help you with your now sight, is just sight. What you're seeing presently in your current state, your current situations, and your foresight. How you're looking to the future, right? How clearly can you see your future, right? So that you can better see what God is doing in your life and how you can participate in it. Next slide. If you look at the Gospel of John, right, chapter 5, verse 19, it says this. Yeshua says, "Very truly I tell you, the Son can do..." Stan, stick with me here. Stan, stick with me here, buddy. Stay with me here. Thank you. Yeshua said this, "Very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees the Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does," right? In other words, with this text, we're saying we have to be able to see it to do it. We have to be able to see it to do it. Like some of y'all saw me pray. Who saw me pray a couple weeks ago? And I got up for the call to worship and put these little readers on that I got from Harris Teeter Supermarket because they amplify what I'm seeing. Because I started getting up there and pray. Put your hand down, Katie. I started getting up there to do the prayer that I write, on my phone, and it's like this. And it's just because you add a few birthdays to your life, and for those of you who don't wear spectacles, you may need them in the future, right? But it's because I need to be able to see with greater clarity as my vision increasingly blurs, right? As my vision increasingly blurs, right? So, like Yeshua said, I only do what I see the Father do, right? We have to see it to do it, right? So this month, next slide, I want to help improve our sight so that, okay, well, I guess I didn't put it as a slide. Keep it there. So that this month, when we see good, we do good. When we see good, we do good, right? So in this series, I want to explore what God is doing by looking at 4 chapters. If we're asking ourselves, what's our story? We're looking into our story. What's the story of our life? What's the story that God's writing? What's the story that we're participating with God to write? All right? I want to look at 4 chapters. Origin, identity, friendships, and failures. Origin, identity, friendships, and failures, right? So with this week in Origins, I want to look at your origin story. That is, how you came to be. Understanding your story can help you identify general, and this is what I'm calling them, patterns and pillars. Generational patterns and pillars. So that you can choose to break them, or you can choose to build on them. Generational patterns and pillars. And we're going to get into that in a second as we continue the discussion. All right? Chapter 2 in identity. Just because your past has helped to form you doesn't mean that you're doomed to stay that way, right? Just because your past contributed to your formation doesn't mean that you're going to stay that way. So when we get into chapter 2, week 2, we're going to have a discussion about how to better accept the identity that God has given us, right? Chapter 3 is friendships. Our friendships shape who we become. And this chapter is going to look at the ways that the friends we had, the friends we have, and the friends that we add play a role into who we are and who we hope to become. Remember what James said last month several times. It's not about who you marry or what job you get or what you do in life. It's who you become. right? That's more important, most important than anything else is who you become. And chapter 4, failures. So with the failures chapter, I want to discuss both your own failures and the failures of others, because some of the impact into who you are and the impact on your story on the whole, your life story, has to do with failures that you commit, things you do and fail. And other failures that have nothing to do with you, you played no part and parcel in the failure, but guess what? It impacts you, right? It's like you being in a car and somebody driving gets in a car accident. You didn't drive, you didn't crash, but it impacted you, right? So I want to discuss how we can process the pain, accept others, and manage the tension of being simultaneously failing and yet living free as believers in faith, right? All right, so let's look at some scripture portions to kind of bring this idea out a little bit. In Psalm 139, verses 13 through 16, it says this, right? It says this: "You created every part of me. You put me together in my mother's womb. When my bones were being formed, carefully put together in my mother's womb, when I was growing there in secret, you knew that I was there. You saw me before I was born. The days allotted to me had all been recorded in your book before any of them ever began." And let me say this based on that text. Very simply, what that text is saying is that you are not an accident, that God created you to be here. You are not an accident. However you came to be in this world, you are not an accident. God created you to be here. Ephesians chapter 1 verse 4 says this: "For he chose us in him before the foundations of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him in love." Again, very simply, what is this verse telling us? That before the earth was ever formed, before those 6 days of labor by God, before the earth was ever formed, you, me, we were chosen to be loved. We're not an accident. We're created to be here. Before the earth was ever formed, we're chosen to be loved by God. Jeremiah chapter 1, who's heard this one, right? "Before I formed you in the womb, I chose you. Before you were born, I set you apart." In this context, it's God saying this to Jeremiah, right? "I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." Right? What is it saying? What does it say to us? What does it certainly say to him? That you have a call and a purpose for your life even before you were born. This was established, right? This was established. You're not an accident. You're created on purpose to be here. Before the earth was formed, you were chosen to be loved. And you have a call and a purpose on your life that existed even before you were ever born. So even the family that you have, whether by birth, right, DNA, the mom gave birth to you, or by, let's say, necessity, or I'll say surrogacy or adoption, the family that you have still contributes to who you become, right? How many of y'all know that mom and dad, right, whether biological or otherwise, had a part and parcel in who you are today? Good or bad, right? The things you like and the things you don't like, right? Mom and dad had a part to play in who I am today, right? Those people, next slide, can establish what I call patterns and pillars. This is what I said before, patterns and pillars. Now, patterns can be good or bad. I'm going to use it with a negative connotation so we can distinguish patterns and pillars, right? Patterns. What do I mean? Right? Habits, right? Some people even try to take this conversation about patterns and when you say generational patterns into generational curses. Who's ever heard a conversation about generational curses, specifically from the Bible, right? Generational curses. You know what I'm saying about that? Generational curses meaning like that God is going to revisit the sins of the forefathers down to the third and fourth generation, right? That God is cursing generations, right? That you see this all of a sudden generationally, that you have these curses that come upon. The great-granddad died of cancer. Granddad died of cancer. Dad died of cancer. Son is like, I'm going to die of cancer. Why? Because I'm cursed. Generationally cursed, right? And so these things start to come up in our thinking. Now, the Bible does teach us that those curses are broken in Yeshua, right? So we're free from curses. But I want to use patterns. They can also be good, right? We've got great-granddad that had a good work ethic, taught us math, taught us how to manage our monies, and was be successful in business. Granddad and dad and me, it all comes down. So you have patterns that get pushed that can be positive. But for my purposes, I'm calling the negative the patterns and the positive the pillars. The patterns are the things you want to break. The pillars are the things you want to build up and build upon. Yeah? Patterns and pillars. So with our patterns, and if you have your notebook, you can put this verse down, because I don't have a slide for it. I have a slide for it, go back. Is Genesis 12, verses 10 through 20, and Genesis 21 through 18. Genesis 12, 10 through 20, and Genesis 20, chapter 20, 1 through 18. So what do I mean by patterns? Let's have some more of the scriptures continue to illustrate this point a little bit more for us, right? We know that Abraham lied twice about his wife. I lie once about my wife, and she's going to have my head on a platter, right? Abraham lied twice about his wife, once to Pharaoh and once to King Abimelech, right? And then you see his son, Abraham's son, the promised son, Isaac, lies about his wife to the men of Gerar. Right? Now, the interesting thing is that Isaac was not even born when his father lied about his wife twice. Both of the instances where Abraham lied about being married to Sarah, oh, it's my sister, lies about his wife to Pharaoh and to Abimelech, Isaac wasn't even born yet. And yet, Isaac still commits the exact same sin against his wife. You ever think about that, right? How did he manage to follow in his father's footsteps when he wasn't even born yet when that happened? It's not like he saw it happen and then repeat it. He wasn't even born yet. I want to use that as one of many biblical examples of generational patterns. Patterns that I will say here need to be broken. Let's be honest. Hear me on this. Do any of y'all do something and you go, man, that was just like Dad? Oof. Oh, I'm my mother right now. And you can't stand it. Because it's negative, right? Look, I know there's parents in the room. I'm a parent. I got parents. And whether they're biological or they're the people that raised you, they will not do it perfect. I mean, we know that. We know that intellectually. Like, how many of y'all know your parents are going to raise you perfectly? 100% of the time, they're going to hit a home run every time up at bat. No. Right? We know that. We know that parents are going to fail. But it's a different conversation entirely when they fail us and we have to experience the fallout from it. Right? Patterns. Okay, but there are pillars, I think, in Scripture as well. And again, I'm just giving one, but of many, right? 2 Timothy says this. Again, I don't have a slide for it, but hear me on this. Listen close. 2 Timothy chapter 1, 3 through 9. If you're writing this in your book, you can go back and read it on your own. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 3 through 9. And pay very close attention to this. This is Paul telling Timothy to encourage him in his pastoral ministry. I call it apostolic ministry, but that's another conversation. I give thanks to God. This is Paul saying this to Timothy. I give thanks to God, whom I serve with a clear conscience, as my ancestors did, right? Pillars. I thank him as I remember you, Timothy, always in my prayers, day and night. I remember the sincere faith that you have, the kind of faith that your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice also had. I'm sure that you have it also. Pillars, right? For this reason, I remind you to keep alive the gift that God gave you, and when I laid my hands on you. For God has not given us a spirit of fear. Instead, his Spirit fills us with power, love, and self-control. Who's ever heard the latter part of that verse? God has not given us a spirit of fear. But there's different versions of it, right? But of power, of love, and of self-control. Who's ever heard that verse quoted like all the time? You know, God's not giving us a spirit of fear. But isn't it interesting that the context of that verse is situated squarely in generational pillars. Generational pillars. What's handed down and you're to build upon. Timothy came to faith for himself, yes. But it was built on the pillars of mom and grandmom. Okay? All right, so here we're going to do it. Now you finally get to your notebooks beyond just the little notes of nuggets that you've written down thus far. If you don't have a notebook, get one. Right? Notebook. Break it out. Now we're going to, and I want to do this kind of rapidly, and then you'll learn a little bit about me as I tell you my experience with doing exactly what I'm asking you to do. I want you to start to consider your origins. And what do I mean by that? I want to first consider your birth narrative, right? I want you to consider your birth narrative. We're answering the question, how were you born? Now, I know some of y'all are sitting there, when a man and a woman love each other, of opposite sex, right? And they come together and they make a baby. That's not what we're asking. Birds and the bees, that's not the discussion right now. The question is, how were you born, right? What does that mean? What's the story of your birth? What's the story of your birth? What were the circumstances, right? How were you born? This is the question that I want you all to take back to your families this week. How were you born? Mom, dad, right? Caregiver, grandma, grandpa, anybody that can answer this question. How was I born? What are the circumstances of your birth, right? What were the circumstances of your birth? How did I, maybe another way to iterate that, another iteration is, how did I come to be in this family? How did I come to be a part of this family? Right? How were you born? Second question is, where is your birthplace? I said, what is your birthplace, right? Where's your birthplace? How were you born? The second question I want you to ask is, where is your birthplace? Now, some of y'all might already know this answer, because you've talked about it in the past, right? But where is your birthplace, right? Are you a country kid, a city slicker, an immigrant, a 1.5 gen? Anybody knows what 1.5 is? 1.5 is like where your parents are immigrants, but you're not, so you're kind of stuck in the middle, right? 1.5, you're kind of an immigrant because of their influence, but you're also national to here, and so you feel like you're stuck in between two cultures, right? How does this impact how you were raised, where you were born? I'm talking about the geography, right? The geography, right? Again, Yeshua was born, we know, in Bethlehem, right? But he was raised in Nazareth, which all scholarly research points, Nazareth was the ghetto. That's right, Yeshua was a hood rat, right? Yo, Yeshua grew up where it was rough and tough, okay? How did that impact his view of the poor, of the destitute, the marginalized by society? Think about this. How does it impact yours, right? Your birthplace. Then you want to think of people of influence, right? Think about your parents or guardians, surrogates, grandma, right? Your parents or guardians. Whomever it is that was or is in charge of raising you, right? Where are they from? Are they immigrants or native born? Parents or guardians. Where are they from? Are they immigrants or native born? Just a show of hands, right? How many of us in this room right now have parents, one or both, who were not born in this country? They immigrated here. Yo, look around. How many of y'all expected to see that many hands? I didn't, honestly. I mean, I know, yeah, but then I'm like, wait a minute. It's a lot of the room, right? Especially in our current culture in the United States of America, how does the parents being immigrants have an impact on who we are and become, how they raise us and how we see ourselves, right? Ask this question. How did they, your parents or guardians, how did they come together? You know, the age-old question of parents or guardians or couples. When couples get together and they're trying to meet each other, they go, how did you meet? Tell us the story of how you met. And then they say, tell us the story of how you proposed to her, right? Right? Ask this. Are they college educated? That's going to change. Was that a question?
Funny you say college educated. My grandfather was my grandmother's professor.
For college? Okay, did she get all A's? He was harder on her, right? Right? Right, but think about this. Why do I say you want to inquire if your parents and grandparents were college educated, college graduates? Because that's going to impact how they push you in your education. It could, right? Right? How they push your education. Or do they just say, go get a job, go out there and work, right? Were they homeowners? One of the primary number one benchmarks for generational wealth, continuing wealth from generation to generation, parents to kids, grandparents, parents to kids, is home ownership. Are your parents, were your grandparents, the people that raised you, the people that raised you, were they homeowners? And then ask the same question again about your grandparents, right? What were they like? What's the story of your parents' birth? What's their birth story? Right? What were the circumstances of their birth? Your grandparents. Now again, some of you might already know these answers, but I'm just going to tell you, one time me and my dad had to drive to Tennessee. We drove from New Jersey to Tennessee to pick up a brand new pickup truck that my dad's brother-in-law had built for him. Beautiful truck, but we had to fly down there and drive it back to Jersey, right? So I had 10 hours or 11 hours sitting in a car driving back to New Jersey with my dad, who's not a conversationalist. Like, he says the minimal words that he needs to say, and he's good. That's not bad, he just doesn't talk a lot. And I'm trapped in a car with him. I learned more about my dad, my granddad, the struggles of their upbringing. I learned more about him on that car ride than I've ever learned my entire life with my pops. All because I started to ask some of these questions I'm telling you to ask. You think you know them, but you maybe have no idea. And some of y'all are finally at the age where you might have the maturity, your parents can answer you honestly, right? Where they might say, oh, granddad, he was his own kind of way. He was a tough guy, but we love him. And now you're old enough they can go, he was a drunk, right? And you're ready to hear that. And you need to hear that because of some of these patterns and pillars that we want to break and build on, right? Did they stay married or did they get divorced? What's that pattern? What's that pillar? The others are maybe surrogates, adoptives. You can even branch this further. Uncles, cousins, neighbors, etc. The people that had influence on you, right? People that had influence on you. You've also got, next slide, circumstances of influence, right? What are the influential circumstances? Look, all of y'all, look, COVID was decreed 2020, which would have made some of y'all very young, right? In 2020. So how did you respond to this? How did people around you respond to this? Circumstances that impact who you are, right? Your origins, how you came to be, right? People around you, how did they respond? How did this impact you? Listen, emotionally, spiritually, socially. There are countless stories of people I know personally, family, friends, and you can read about that the emotional, spiritual, and social impact was dramatic, right? COVID. Other things, you can, again, branch this even further. Look, what formed you? The fact that I was born with light skin instead of dark skin in an inner city, game changer, right? Game changer. Skin color. Were you born into an upper class, middle class, lower class, right? What's your ethnicity, right? Does being born Latino, does being born Russian, how did that impact who you are and how you see yourself, right? What's been the impact, right? Again, the last one would be circumstances like smartphones and the internet, right? How does that shape your view of the world and of yourself? And how does that affect your ability, listen to this, to relate to older generations, right? You feel like, I can't talk to anybody over 30 because they don't get me. They still think you can unplug. You can't unplug. Josh Ortiz, catch a clue, right? Write these questions down because this is how you're going to reflect on everything that I was just handing you. Number one, what are the patterns or the pillars? Again, patterns we want to break. The negative stuff that you see. When you start asking about the people, the influential people and circumstances in your life and the impact, what are the patterns and the negative stuff? And then the pillars. What is the good stuff that we want to build on? Just like Paul said, Grandma had faith. Mama had faith. You have faith. Pillars. What has been their impact? How has grandpa, dad, uncle, being a womanizer impacted how you see men that you might want to date one day? What's been the impact of the patterns of the pillars? Question 3 is really important. What do you want to target to break or to build on? Right? Look, you can't target everything, at least not all at once. But what are some of the patterns that you want to break and pillars that you want to build on? I promise you, if you give these things real thought, they will have serious impact. Kim, how close are we to the end with Sam? Good. And question 4, how is God using these things, the patterns and the pillars and the impact, to form you? Everybody got these 4 questions? No. Okay. Leave them up there just for one more second, James, please. Right? These are the reflective questions that you want to be asking in response to the answers and the conversations that you have based on everything that we said. Right? Again, your birth narrative. How were you born? What's your birthplace? Parents and guardians, grandparents and great-grandparents. Your circumstances, moments of influence, loss, COVID, other things. What are the patterns, pillars, impact? What do you want to break? What do you want to build on? And how is God using them to form you? Okay? All right, you can go to the next slide, James. Unless, does somebody else need it still? You guys are good? All right, next slide. Thank you. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, because you're going to say, Josh Ortiz, you got up there, you did some exercise, that's really great. I want to tell you how exactly what I'm giving you here, prompting you towards in this book, with this talk this morning, exactly what I did. My parents, my mom and dad, came from extreme geography, right? My mother's from Maine. Who knows where the great state of Maine is? Right up in the northeastmost state, right next to Canada, right? My father, born and raised in the mountains of Puerto Rico. That's in the Caribbean, y'all. Very far apart, right? And just a simple thing like, hey, where did my parents come from? How did one guy get from an island in the Caribbean and one woman get from the backwoods of a small town the size of my gym class in high school? I'm not even making this up. And they came together and they had me. God had a serious purpose in bringing me into this world, right? Because he had to bring these 2 people from distant geographies, right? I was born in Elizabeth, raised in Elizabeth, and lived in Newark, and then moved around. I'm a city kid, right? Again, like I said about Yeshua, I'm a city kid. It exposed me and gave me a deeper understanding to cultural diversity, poverty, urban lifestyle. I think I probably like more rap music and hip-hop than country, though I love country, because of where I grew up and who I grew up around, right? How was I born? There was a lot of difficulty at my birth. Some of y'all don't know, I was a premature kid. I was born 2 months early to the day. My due date given to my folks was December 11th. I was born October 11th. When I was born 2 months early, going 45 years ago, tech wasn't what it was. Science wasn't what it was. I was also wedged under my mother's rib cage for long enough that when I was born, I was blue because I wasn't breathing. I was premature. I was almost dead. And in fact, I was in the hospital for an entire month, getting nursed back in the ICU to good health. And in fact, that's how I got my name. Because my parents said, well, we got to name him because they're going to put the birth certificate soon enough. We got to name this kid. What are we going to name him? And they said, we want to go with Joshua. And they were believers at the time, and they said, we want to go with Joshua because Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and he triumphed through God's hand. That's how I got my name. Something small, something simple. But what does that say? How does that speak volumes to my life today? Right? My parents were looking at the time. My dad was raised Catholic. My mother was raised Baptist. They were trying to look for a church when they moved to New Jersey. And they were going to Catholic masses and to regular Baptist churches. And finally, a church they had visited several times during my time in the hospital had a rose on the altar. And they wanted to honor my folks and let them know that they were praying for my family and for my health and for my safety in the hospital. And so my mother saw that as a sign to stay with that church, to invest in that community, and that's where I was ultimately born, raised, and learned all about the Lord to start my journey as a pre-believer, right? These are stories that I had to learn because I was asking and listening to my folks who were telling them, the people who raised me, the people around me who knew them, right? When I was born in the hospital, there was a photo that was taken of me, right? The little bassinet, they wheeled out in the ICU, and there was all these other babies around. They all happened to be girls. Wheeled the little baby, wheeled the little baby, wheeled the little baby, and they took a photo, click, and there's Josh in the middle of all these other little baby girls. And they gave it to my mom, and they wrote on the back, Joshua's harem. Joshua's harem. Now, most of y'all probably don't know what the word harem means. But a harem is essentially a group of women who share the same man. Usually as wives. First, second, third wife, tertiary wives. A group of women who share the same man. And of course, at the time, they're thinking, hee hee hee, nice little photo, keep it moving. And they probably had no idea what that would speak into my life as kind of a precursor moment of a guy who would struggle with relationships with women from early high school into adulthood, right? My grandfather, on my dad's side, right, he was run out of PR for murder, right? So the story goes. Why? Because he was a womanizer. Also, not just my generation. He was a womanizer, got in bed with the wrong woman, ticked off the wrong guy who came at him, and in the fight, he killed the guy. And so my grandfather's father, my great-grandfather, spent all the money he had, the whole farm, paying for legal fees to keep that man out of jail. And so guess where the now poor family had to migrate? United States of America. My family came to be in this country from my dad and back because of a man who couldn't keep it in his pants. How do you think that forms who I am and how I see myself? Right? My dad grew up Spanish speaking. I grew up in a city that was loaded with Spanish people, and I knew, man, I want to get me a nice Spanish girl. Particularly, I like Colombians. Yeah, I got a type, right? I got a type. Particularly Spanish. But my father didn't raise me to speak Spanish in the house. I had to learn it from the street, which is far more broken and less, it's more crass, right? You know, the difference between like street talk and like college conversation. Two different conversations, the way it sounds, right? I had to learn all that from the street because my father was raised by a man who was like, no, you come to America, you learn to speak English. That's the money language. Now my dad's going to be 80 in a couple of months. So that was like 50 years ago, 60 years ago. The country wasn't what it is today. When you say, man, if you know Spanish, you're really going to cash in, right? Because then you can ascend the ladder. How many of us were saying, I know 5, 6, 3, 4 languages, right? Bilingualism wasn't what it is today back then. So I was raised in a different household. How do you think that impacted my desire to go on dates with girls that I had interest in, right? To connect with a culture that I couldn't communicate with, right? What about this? My grandparents and parents. My grandparents were married for 63 years. Would have been married longer. My grandfather died first. My parents have been married 47 years and counting, right? 47 years and counting. Just asking about the longevity of the marriage relationships going backwards. I get into a relationship with my wife now, and when we were dating, I had to constantly reassure her that there is a pillar that we're building on together as dating and then engaged and husband and wife that comes from my line because hers had patterns of divorce, of infidelity, right, and broken relationships. She didn't have nobody that could meet those. And the ones who had a few years under their belt, they were happy and upset with each other like all the time, right? Look, I could keep going, and I know the time is nigh, but think about this. Answer these questions for yourself. Go back to your families, to your friends, to those who have had influence on you. Ask these questions, get these answers, and dig out these patterns and pillars so that you can start to go to God and say, Lord, I see the patterns. I want to break them. The only one who can break them is God, and you can participate in that breaking. Or, God, I want to build on this because this is strong, this is solid, this is what I want to do, where I want to be, how you're using me. Right? Simple, it makes sense, but you got to put in the work.